"You've been watched this whole time," Lucy whispered, her voice so quiet that it barely cut through the hum of the office. The air seemed to thicken, the tension palpable as Nathaniel Blackwood's eyes snapped toward her. His hand, which had been casually resting on the back of his chair, froze mid-motion. His breath caught. The room was silent, like a still photograph of disbelief. "What did you say?" Nathaniel's voice was cold, but there was a flicker of unease behind it. He quickly masked it with arrogance, leaning back in his chair as if he were in control of the situation, yet his eyes remained locked on Lucy, waiting for the next words to fall from her lips. Lucy wasn't just another office worker to be dismissed. She had spent months cleaning the polished floors of his high-rise, wiping the desks where deals worth millions were made. No one ever noticed her. She was invisible, or so they thought, but she wasn't stupid. She had noticed the cameras. She had seen the blinking red lights in the corners of the room, a secret watching, hidden in plain sight. She wasn't even supposed to be in this room today, but curiosity, that little voice in her head, had guided her here. And now, she was about to turn the tables. "There's a camera in your office," she repeated, her voice steady, unwavering. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, the billionaire's usual composure faltered. The room was still, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the boardroom. His fiancée, Sarah, sitting at his side, gave a haughty chuckle, dismissing Lucy's words as nothing more than a joke. "You're a janitor. What do you know about security systems?" she said, her tone dripping with disdain. Lucy didn't flinch. She had been mocked before, many times, by people who thought they were better than her. But today, the tables were about to be turned. She stepped forward, her eyes never leaving Nathaniel's. "I know enough," Lucy said calmly. "I know that you've been recording everything in this room for weeks." Nathaniel's face flushed, the color draining from his cheeks as the full weight of her words settled in. His jaw tightened, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't the one in control. Sarah's expression faltered as well, her eyes darting from Nathaniel to Lucy, confusion flickering behind her usually composed demeanor. Nathaniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the polished floor, and for a moment, Lucy feared he might explode. But instead, he simply stared at her, as though weighing his next move. His calm facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of panic. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his voice shaking slightly despite his best efforts to remain stoic. But Lucy was done with games. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her, not this time. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. "I've seen the footage," she said. "I know what you've been doing, Nathaniel. And now, you'll have to face the truth." The room held its breath as Lucy pressed a button on the device. The screen lit up, revealing the secret footage of Nathaniel and Sarah, their conversation about manipulating investors, about scheming behind closed doors. The room was stunned into silence, the once powerful billionaire now standing motionless, exposed. Sarah's face drained of color as the truth was laid bare. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Nathaniel's hands trembled slightly as he turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" Sarah, for the first time, couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. Her perfect image was shattered, her secrets no longer safe. Nathaniel's world, built on control and dominance, was crashing down. He was no longer the one pulling the strings. It was Lucy now, the one they had all underestimated, who held the power. And as the silence lingered, the weight of that power settled in. A lesson in humility and truth that no one in the room would ever forget. "I've seen how power can shift in an instant, how control can slip through your fingers when you least expect it." Nathaniel Blackwood had spent years building an empire, but in that one moment, standing in his own office, with a hidden camera exposed and his secrets unraveling, he realized just how fragile his world truly was. Lucy had done more than just reveal the camera. She had revealed his weakness, something no one in his life had dared to uncover. The silence in the room was deafening, the hum of the office air conditioning the only sound as Nathaniel stood frozen, his back against the edge of his desk. Sarah, standing beside him, had gone pale, her once perfect composure shattered. Her eyes flicked nervously between Nathaniel and Lucy, but there was no escape this time. The truth had been exposed, and now they had to face it. Nathaniel's mind raced, but his lips were paralyzed. What could he say? How could he explain something so blatant, so utterly damning? His eyes turned toward Sarah, who looked like a cornered animal, but she wasn't his concern now. Lucy had the power. Lucy, the quiet janitor who had always been invisible, who had spent months cleaning up after the powerful, now held the truth in her hands. The footage she'd uncovered was damning. Sarah's lies, her manipulations, the secret meetings with rival investors. Everything had been caught on camera. Nathaniel had no words, no defense. He was a man who had spent his life manipulating others, making them bend to his will, and now he found himself the subject of his own game. It was his turn to be played. You think this is all a joke? Lucy's voice broke the silence. She stepped forward, the click of her shoes on the polished floor echoing in the stillness of the office. Her eyes, usually hidden behind the mop and bucket, now looked directly into Nathaniel's. There was no fear in them, only clarity. You thought you could control everything, everyone. But not me. Not today. Nathaniel's face twisted, a mix of anger and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain the years of manipulation, the lies, the deals made in the dark corners of his empire? How could he justify it when all of it was laid bare before him? Sarah, still standing beside him, looked like she might break down, but Lucy's gaze never wavered. She wasn't interested in Sarah's tears or Nathaniel's excuses. This was bigger than their story. It was about the truth finally coming to light, about the people who had been silenced for so long, the people who had always been invisible. Lucy had always been invisible, but not anymore. Nathaniel's hand trembled as he reached for his phone, likely to call security, but Lucy was already one step ahead. She pressed another button on the device, and the room's lights flickered briefly. You think you can erase this? She asked. You think you can just sweep it all under the rug like you've done with everyone else? Not this time. Her words rang out, loud and clear, a stark contrast to the way they had treated her. In the silence that followed, Sarah's voice broke through, shaking with panic. You don't know what you're doing, she pleaded. You'll regret this. Lucy's response was simple. No? You're the one who will regret this. The power in the room had shifted. For the first time, Nathaniel was the one on the receiving end of manipulation. The one who was vulnerable. He could feel the walls of his empire crumbling around him, but there was nothing he could do to stop it. It was too late. The truth had already been spoken, and nothing could erase it now. Lucy turned toward the door, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. The game was over. She had won. Lucy walked out of the office, her heart racing with adrenaline, but she kept her head held high. For once, she wasn't the invisible one. For once, she was seen. She had always known there was something off about Nathaniel's empire, the way things were too polished, too perfect. He had always been the powerful billionaire with a smooth exterior, a man who controlled everything in his world. But today, it wasn't him who held the power. It was her. As Lucy walked down the hall, her mind replayed the events in the boardroom. The look of shock on Nathaniel's face, the silence that had fallen over the room when the footage had been revealed. It was like everything she had ever known about him was shattered in an instant. She didn't feel satisfied. She didn't feel victorious. It wasn't about winning for her. It was about making sure the truth was heard, making sure that the people who had been trampled on for so long could finally stand up. The elevator dinged as the doors opened, and she stepped inside. The weight of what she had done was beginning to sink in, but she couldn't allow herself to dwell on it. Not now. Not when there was still so much to be done. She had made her point, but Nathaniel wasn't just going to let it go. He had always been a man who got what he wanted, no matter the cost. What would he do now? What would Sarah do? She didn't know, but she couldn't let fear stop her. The elevator stopped, and Lucy stepped out into the lobby. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it, and her eyes widened as she read the words. You've made a big mistake, Lucy. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. The message was short, but it sent a chill down her spine. She knew this was just the beginning. Nathaniel wouldn't go down without a fight, but neither would she. Lucy took a deep breath and walked out of the building, the doors closing behind her with a soft whoosh. The world outside seemed unchanged, but Lucy knew nothing would ever be the same. She had just exposed the lies of a powerful man, and she wasn't going to stop there. She wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. Not this time. She was ready to fight for what was right. She was ready to show them all that the truth was stronger than any empire, no matter how much money or influence it had. The world was waking up, and Lucy was going to make sure it knew what Nathaniel Blackwood and his fiancée had been hiding all this time. Lucy didn't know how much time had passed when she finally reached the quiet corner of the small park across from the building. Her legs felt like lead, her mind still racing with the consequences of what she had just done. The world around her seemed to blur, as if everything had shifted in a way that she couldn't fully grasp. She found a bench and sat, the cool evening breeze brushing her face, trying to steady her breathing. The message had hit her hard, but it didn't scare her. If anything, it fueled her determination. Nathaniel's empire was built on secrets, on controlling everything and everyone around him. But Lucy had just cracked that empire wide open. She wasn't afraid of him or Sarah anymore. They had underestimated her, and now it was time to make them regret it. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her thoughts. It was another message, this time from an unknown number. Meet me at the old warehouse off 6th and Pine, if you want to know what comes next. There was no signature, just a sense of urgency in the words. Lucy hesitated for a moment, wondering whether it was a trap, but her gut told her it wasn't. This was bigger than just Nathaniel. She had stumbled onto something deep, and she needed to know more. She stood up, taking a deep breath, and walked toward the street. She had no idea who this person was or what they wanted, but she had to find out. The city streets felt empty as she walked, the sun setting behind the skyscrapers. She wasn't sure what to expect when she reached the warehouse, but she knew it was part of the puzzle. The pieces were starting to come together. She had exposed the camera, but what she didn't know was how deep Nathaniel's involvement went, how many people were complicit in the lies. The warehouse loomed ahead as she walked down the dark street, its broken windows and rusted doors giving it an eerie, abandoned feel. She looked around, but there was no one in sight. She checked her phone again to confirm the address, then made her way inside. The interior was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of dust and old machinery. She took a cautious step, her eyes scanning the shadows. She wasn't sure what was waiting for her here, but there was no turning back now. Her heart pounded in her chest as she moved deeper into the warehouse. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Lucy froze, her breath caught in her throat. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by the dim light. "I was wondering when you'd show up," the man said, his voice low and calm. Lucy didn't say anything at first, unsure whether to trust him, but something in his tone told her he wasn't here to harm her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. "I know what you found," the man replied, taking a step forward. "And I know what's coming for you." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, her pulse quickening. "Nathaniel Blackwood isn't just a businessman," the man said. "He's involved in something much bigger, something that goes beyond the cameras and the lies." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and Lucy felt the weight of them settle in her chest. She had thought she had uncovered the whole story, but this man was telling her there was more to it, something darker lurking beneath the surface. "What do you want from me?" Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man paused, his gaze locked on hers. "I want you to help me bring him down," he said. "But be careful. You've made powerful enemies." The words were like a warning, but Lucy didn't hesitate. She knew that this was her chance to do something that would change everything. Nathaniel Blackwood had ruined enough lives. Now, it was time for him to pay for his sins. Lucy stood taller, the determination in her eyes burning brighter than ever. "I'm in," she said, her voice clear and firm. The man nodded, as if he had been expecting that answer. "Good," he said. "But remember, we're not just fighting for justice. We're fighting for the truth. And that's a battle worth fighting for." The days following their meeting in the warehouse felt like a whirlwind. Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that everything was accelerating, moving too fast for her to fully process. She had joined a fight that was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. The man she had met, who called himself Marcus, had given her a new sense of purpose, but it also came with a weight she hadn't expected. He had shared details about Nathaniel Blackwood's vast web of influence. He was no longer just the billionaire CEO. He was a key figure in a network of powerful people, pulling strings behind the scenes. They weren't just dealing with a corrupt businessman anymore. They were up against a system. Lucy's days were now filled with strategy meetings with Marcus, planning how to expose the full extent of Nathaniel's corruption. She had access to the data Nathaniel had hidden so carefully. His secret financial dealings, offshore accounts, and insider trading schemes. But there was one piece of information they still didn't have. Evidence of Nathaniel's involvement with a larger, more dangerous group that operated under the radar. It was this group that Lucy feared would do anything to protect their interests. Despite the danger, Lucy wasn't about to back down. She had seen the kind of damage Nathaniel's empire had caused, and now it was her turn to be a part of the change. They needed a plan, one that would hit Nathaniel where it hurt the most, his reputation. They needed to make sure the world saw him for who he truly was, a man who hid behind a facade of success while manipulating people for his gain. As the weeks went by, the pressure intensified. Lucy had to be careful. Every move she made was being watched, but she had learned how to keep a low profile. She had always been invisible, and now, that invisibility was her greatest asset. One night, as she sat in the small apartment she called home, going over documents with Marcus, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unfamiliar number. "We know what you're planning," it read. "If you go any further, you won't be the only one who pays the price." The chill that ran down her spine was almost physical. Nathaniel wasn't just watching her. He was aware of her every move. She stared at the phone for a moment, feeling the weight of the threat. But then, something inside her clicked. This was what she had been fighting for all along. She had been invisible for too long, and now, Nathaniel's empire was going to crumble, no matter how many threats they made. The next day, Marcus called her. He had found a lead. It was a small but crucial detail hidden in a file, a name that appeared over and over again in Nathaniel's dealings, a name tied to the elusive group they were searching for. The pieces were finally coming together. It was time to go public. It was time to expose Nathaniel for everything he was. But they still had one last hurdle to overcome, getting the information into the right hands. It wouldn't be enough just to release it. They needed to make sure it reached the people who could make a difference. They couldn't trust the media, not with Nathaniel's influence over them. They needed a backup plan. As Lucy prepared for the next steps, she felt more determined than ever. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like she was finally in control of her own destiny. Nathaniel's empire might have been built on lies, but Lucy's strength, her resolve, would be the foundation of the truth that would bring it down. The days following their breakthrough were filled with a quiet intensity. Lucy could feel the pressure building with each passing hour, the weight of the next steps pressing down on her shoulders. She had everything they needed. Well, almost everything. The documents, the footage, the names, each piece of the puzzle was in place. But there was one final step that would determine the success of their plan. The data was too important, too explosive to trust to just anyone. They needed someone who could get it into the right hands without being intercepted. Someone who wouldn't be swayed by Nathaniel's money or influence. Marcus had suggested an underground network, a group of whistleblowers who specialized in exposing corporate corruption, but Lucy wasn't sure. She didn't know if she could trust anyone outside of their small circle. But there was no other choice. They couldn't risk Nathaniel getting wind of their plans. One wrong move, and everything they had worked for could be erased in an instant. As she sat in her small apartment, Lucy glanced over the information one last time. The name at the top of the most important file stared back at her, Gregory Hardwick. The name was buried in the pages of Nathaniel's personal correspondence, but it was clear that Hardwick was the key to everything. He was the one who had facilitated all of Nathaniel's illegal deals, the one who had kept the operation running smoothly behind the scenes. But the question still lingered. How could they use this information to take down Nathaniel and his empire? Marcus called again that evening. The plan was set. They would meet the following night at an old cafe on the edge of town, a place known for being discreet. Lucy didn't know much about the underground network Marcus had mentioned, but she trusted him. At least, she had to. The next night, Lucy found herself sitting in a dimly lit corner of the cafe, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The air was thick with the smell of stale bread and old newspapers. She glanced around, waiting. It was late, and the cafe was nearly empty. The only people there were those who, like her, preferred to remain unnoticed. As the door opened, Lucy's eyes met a man's, a tall, broad-shouldered figure who walked into the room with a quiet confidence. His face was partially obscured by a baseball cap, but Lucy could tell he was there. For business. He made his way to the table, and Lucy stood to greet him. "You must be Lucy," the man said, his voice low and calm. He extended his hand. "Gregory Hardwick," he continued. "We've been expecting you." The name struck her like a lightning bolt. She had imagined a different man, someone older, perhaps. But there he was, right in front of her. She shook his hand, trying to hide her surprise. "I have the information you requested," she said, slipping the file from her bag. Gregory nodded, his eyes scanning the room before he took the file from her hands. "Good," he said. "We'll get this to the right people. Nathaniel Blackwood won't be able to run from this." But even as he spoke, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she had realized. She had been so focused on taking down Nathaniel, on exposing the truth, that she hadn't stopped to consider the bigger picture. What would happen when the information went public? What kind of backlash would they face? Gregory seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't worry," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "We'll make sure it goes exactly where it needs to. You did the right thing." Lucy wasn't so sure, but for now, she had no choice but to trust him. As she left the cafe that night, the weight of the decision settled heavily in her chest. The plan was in motion, but the real battle was only just beginning. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blending into the next as Lucy waited for the inevitable fallout. The file she had handed over to Gregory was now in the hands of people who could bring Nathaniel Blackwood down, but the quiet anxiety in her chest never left. Every phone call, every message, every glance felt like it was being watched. She had done her part, but now, the rest was out of her control. Or so she thought. It was early in the morning when Lucy's phone buzzed with an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" she asked, her voice steady despite the racing thoughts in her head. "Lucy, it's Marcus," came the voice on the other end. "We've hit a major roadblock." The words sent a jolt through her body. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep the panic from creeping into her voice. "Someone's trying to cover this up. Nathaniel has already started using his influence to erase the data. The files are being deleted from the servers, and we've had to move fast. We might have only hours before it's all gone." Lucy felt the blood rush from her face. This wasn't just about exposing Nathaniel anymore. It was about surviving. The stakes had gotten higher. She needed to act, and she needed to act now. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. "I need you to come with me. We're going to the one place they can't erase the evidence, Hardwick's old storage unit. It's the only backup we've got." Marcus's voice was calm, but there was a trace of urgency beneath it. Lucy didn't waste another second. She grabbed her bag, making sure the last remaining copies of the documents were tucked safely inside. She was no longer just a bystander in this fight. She was the one holding the keys to everything. When she met Marcus in the parking lot, his face was more serious than she had ever seen it. "They know we're coming," he said, his voice low. "So, we need to be quick. We can't afford any mistakes." Lucy nodded. She could feel the weight of what they were about to do. It wasn't just about taking down Nathaniel anymore. It was about fighting for the truth, no matter what. They drove through the empty streets, the city still asleep as the world around them felt strangely quiet. When they reached the storage facility, Lucy felt the familiar chill run down her spine. This wasn't just another task, it was the final act. They moved quickly, slipping through the gates and into the back room where Hardwick had kept his most sensitive files. The place smelled musty, like old paper and dust, but to Lucy, it was the smell of hope. As they opened the storage unit, Lucy's breath caught in her throat. The file cabinets were stacked high, each one filled with evidence that could bring Nathaniel to his knees. But there was no time to waste. They began pulling the files out, sifting through them as quickly as possible. As Lucy turned to grab another file, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "You're too late. Nathaniel already knows." Her heart raced as she read the message, feeling the walls closing in around her. They had to finish this, and fast. They couldn't let Nathaniel destroy everything. But as she looked over at Marcus, she could see the worry in his eyes. They had done everything they could to prepare for this moment, but the threat of failure loomed over them like a dark cloud. "We're almost there," Marcus said, his voice filled with a mix of hope and fear. "Just a little longer." Lucy took a deep breath, pushing aside the fear that threatened to paralyze her. They had come this far. They couldn't back down now. They had to finish what they had started. It wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had been hurt by Nathaniel's lies. It was for the truth. The clock was ticking. Lucy could feel it in the pit of her stomach as she rifled through the last of the files, every second counting down to something she couldn't fully grasp. The warehouse was eerily silent, the only sound being the rustle of papers as she and Marcus continued their frantic search. She could feel the weight of what was at stake pressing down on her. Nathaniel had to pay for what he had done, his lies, his manipulation, the way he had used people to build his empire. She wasn't just here to expose him. She was here to make sure the truth would reach the world, no matter the cost. The room felt colder as she moved closer to the last file cabinet. They were almost done. But then, just as Marcus opened another drawer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The vibration cut through the silence, and Lucy felt her heart skip a beat. "What is it?" she asked, already knowing the answer before he looked at the screen. Marcus's face hardened, the color draining from his cheeks as he read the message. "It's from Gregory," he said, his voice tight. "Nathaniel knows. They're coming for us." The words hit like a punch. Lucy's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't move. She had known the risks, but now the reality of it was setting in. They had no more time to waste. "We need to go," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "Now." Lucy nodded, grabbing the last of the documents and shoving them into her bag. Her hands were shaking as she did, but she couldn't afford to show fear. They had to get out of here, and fast. As they rushed toward the exit, the faint sound of sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder by the second. The authorities were on their way, and Nathaniel's people weren't far behind. The city, once quiet, now felt like a labyrinth, every corner hiding a new threat. But they couldn't stop now. They had the evidence. The truth was in their hands, and they couldn't let Nathaniel destroy it. They had no choice but to trust the plan, even if it felt like they were running blind. The streets outside the warehouse were dimly lit, the air thick with tension as they hurried toward the car. Lucy's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced over her shoulder. Every step they took seemed to echo in the stillness of the night, and for a moment, she thought she saw a shadow move in the distance. Her instincts kicked in. "Move faster," she urged Marcus, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. They were so close, but it didn't feel like it. Not when every corner they turned could be their last. When they finally reached the car, Marcus slammed the door shut behind them. The engine roared to life, and they sped off into the night, the sound of tires screeching on the wet pavement. Lucy didn't look back, but she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, like everything was hanging by a thread. They couldn't go back. They couldn't afford to fail now. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the engine's roar. Marcus didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Finally, he spoke, his voice grim. "Now, we make sure it gets to the right people. No one can stop us now." The air in the car felt thick, heavy with uncertainty, but Lucy knew they were right. The plan had to work. They had come too far to turn back. The fight for the truth was only beginning. The car sped through the streets, its headlights slicing through the dark, empty roads. Lucy sat in the passenger seat, her mind racing, her heart still pounding from the chaos of the last few hours. They had done it. They had taken the documents, the evidence, and now it was in the hands of the people who could expose Nathaniel for who he truly was. But even as they drove, a feeling of unease gnawed at her. She had done what she set out to do, but now, the hardest part was yet to come. Would anyone believe the truth they had uncovered? Or would Nathaniel's influence be enough to silence them all? She couldn't afford to think like that. Not now. Not when everything was in motion. Marcus remained silent as he drove, his focus on the road, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. The tension in the car was palpable, the weight of their actions hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. They had made their move, but what would the fallout be? Lucy glanced at Marcus, wondering if he was feeling the same way. He had always been calm, composed, but now there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "You think they'll get it to the right people?" she asked, her voice steady, but tinged with the same worry that had been building inside her. Marcus didn't immediately answer, his eyes locked on the road ahead. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "I have to believe they will. We don't have another option. If we back out now, Everything we've done will be for nothing. His words were firm, but there was a quiet doubt in his voice. Lucy could hear it, even if he was trying to hide it. She understood. It was easy to get lost in the fight, to focus on the end goal, but the path they had chosen was fraught with danger. There were people in Nathaniel's circle who wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to protect their empire. And now, Lucy had made herself a target. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of the story, and it would be hard for her to walk away unscathed. They drove for what felt like hours, the city lights passing in a blur, until they finally reached their destination. It was a small, inconspicuous building tucked away on the outskirts of the city. Marcus parked the car, and they sat there for a moment, the weight of what was about to happen settling in. "This is it," Marcus said quietly, turning off the engine. "We get this information into the right hands, and we walk away. It's over." But Lucy knew it wasn't over. Not really. Even if the documents made it to the right people, even if Nathaniel's empire came crashing down, there was no going back to the life she had known. She had crossed a line, and she couldn't undo it. But there was no regret. Not now. "Let's go," Lucy said, pushing open the door and stepping out into the cool night air. They moved quickly, blending into the shadows as they made their way into the building. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, the quiet hum of technology filling the room as they set the files down on the table. The man who had been waiting for them, the one who had agreed to help, greeted them with a nod. "This is it," he said. "The world will know the truth now." Lucy didn't respond, her eyes on the papers in front of her. She could feel the weight of what was happening, but she didn't feel relief. Not yet. The battle was far from over. Nathaniel wouldn't give up easily, and neither would his allies. But as they handed over the final pieces of the puzzle, Lucy felt something shift inside her. She had done what she came here to do. The truth was out, and there was nothing Nathaniel or anyone else could do to stop it now.